I'm Sienna. I'm the kid.
I'm Sarah. I'm the mom.
This is Queer Kid Straight Mom.
Let's talk. Welcome back to Queer Kids Straight Mom. Sorry for the delay in this broadcast. We have had kind of a crazy few weeks of travel, but we're back in town and ready to talk about whether or not being gay or trans is just a fad these days. A recent Gallup poll showed more than 1 in 5 Gen Z adults, which is ages 18 to 26, identifying as LGBTQ+, as well as nearly 1 in 10 millennials, which is ages 27 to 42. The percentage falls to less than 5% of Gen X, 43 to 58, 2% of baby boomers, which is ages 59 to 77, and 1% of the silent generation, which is 78 and older. And now I'm really curious about why they're called that. Do you know?
Oh, I think that was 78 and older.
Mm-hmm.
People born prior to the 50s, right?
Yes.
So like people who are involved in the world wars, I think.
Okay. Why silent? Do you know?
Well, I'm trying to work out. Sorry, I'm doing math, and math is not my strong suit. So 50s and older, that feels old, but the lost generation is a way of talking about like the people who served in the wars and, were dealing with PTSD and, a bunch of them just died. Although that is more of a European thing. But I mean, I don't know. That would be my guess based on my historical knowledge. Feels like it doesn't line up quite right. But anyway, this tangent brought to you by my loose U.S. history knowledge.
And me asking questions that I just didn't look up at the time. I could have been armed with that information. The point of all those numbers being that this percentage has grown a lot with each generation. Now, you'll find different theories about why this is, depending on who you ask. Generally, people in academic fields or who are well educated on LGBTQ plus issues interpret this as not an actual change in the population, but a change in whether people are willing to be open about their sexuality or gender identity. An example of something similar that Sienna and I both like to use is left-handedness. About 10 to 12% of the world's population is left-handed, according to research. It seems ridiculous to care what hand people use, but left-handedness used to carry enormous stigma. Left-handed people were once considered evil or unlucky. In Britain in the Middle Ages, they were associated with the devil and often accused of witchcraft. The word sinister even comes from the Latin word for left, and the word left itself has roots in words meaning weak. Until not that long ago, left-handed kids were forced to predominantly use their right hands. And in some countries, it's still considered rude to eat, shake hands, or pick things up with your left hand. So considering all this, it's not surprising that in the 1800s, when data on handedness first appeared, left-handedness hit a low of 3%. Is it reasonable to assume that this number increased 3 to 4-fold in the last century and a half? Of course not. It just became accepted to be left-handed, so people didn't try to force their kids to function as if they were right-handed when they weren't.
Also, no one is pretending to be left-handed because they think it's cool. That would be weird.
That would be weird. Although when I was a kid, I did try to train myself to write with my left hand because I thought it would be more interesting, but it didn't work.
Right. How did that go for you?
It didn't work because I'm not left-handed. And ultimately, it was just too hard. And so then I just used my right hand because I could actually get things done.
Oh, random story. I am left-handed. I also have tried to write with my right hand. It doesn't work well. I wish I was ambidextrous, but I'm not. But one time we were over at a friend's house and everybody was having a left-handed writing competition. So then I wrote with my left hand and everyone was amazed. And then you were like, Sienna, you're left-handed. And everyone was not amazed anymore.
You were just trying to trick them. Yeah, we really like that example because it's something that also has shown a lot of growth in the population statistically, but we know that nothing has happened that has made more people left-handed. Just people admit it. People are allowed to use their left hands.
People don't have their left hand taped to the desk.
People aren't burned at the stake. There are a lot of things that have made it easier to be left-handed, so more people live as left-handed people. This makes sense to us. That it would work the same way with being gay or transgender. There was a time when that could be a death sentence. where that could mean, you're completely isolated from society. It could mean all sorts of horrible, horrible things. So of course people didn't admit it.
There are places where those things are still true today. And yes, the populations of queer people are much smaller there. Populations of openly queer people, though, right?
Exactly. It seems logical to assume that these growing numbers are because it is more accepted in our society and people are willing to come out more freely. But of course, there are people who choose to believe a different narrative. This group thinks that more kids are deciding to be gay or transgender, either because it's a fad or because they have been indoctrinated by schools. I thought this fellow was really interesting. Jesse Alvarez, pastor of Valley Life Community Church in Selma, says our concern is what our children in the schools are being taught in regards to the transgenderism. But luckily for the people that he serves, they also are hosting a Crisis in Our Classrooms conference, or did. I think this is in the past, but an event geared toward educating pastors, churches, and families in the community about what is happening with the sexualization of our children in our classroom.
Just what I've always wanted.
These numbers are really alarming to this other part of the population that thinks that kids are being coerced somehow or peer pressured into being LGBTQ plus. I've even seen people post the charts that have the increasing percentages of gay and trans people and say, see, it's a fad, which again, circle back to left-handedness. But it is really believed to be something that is like overtaking the youth of this generation. And I think it is really important to stress as we talk about this. I just want to say this going in, saying, oh, maybe I'm trans. Maybe that's why I feel this way. Trying that on, realizing it's not the case, that's different than pretending to be something you're not because you think it's cool or interesting or rebellious. There are parents that look at kids that say, I think I might be this, and then say, okay, I guess I wasn't. I guess I'm not. And think that that's evidence that it's, you'll grow out of it. It's just something that kids are like, it's a fad. That's part of the evidence too, that some kids don't stick with that identity, ignoring the fact that some kids don't stick with that identity because in today's adolescent society, they feel like they have the freedom to try on something and see if it feels right. And if it doesn't, then just to move on. But there are also kids that try it on and the backlash is so horrible that they don't stick with it. These are things that are also claimed as evidence of a fad, but I just wanted to make it clear that it not being a lasting thing does not always mean that it's manipulated or coerced or something that kids are pressured to do.
Right. Like, believe it or not, kids are people and kids can think for themselves. And there are things that influence the way they perceive the world, just like everybody else on the face of the planet. But kids are also typically a lot smarter than people give them credit for and a lot more self-aware. And frankly, it's just rude and infantilizing to assume like, oh, my teenage kid is so stupid. They can't make decisions for themselves. Obviously, they've been coerced and brainwashed by the big, scary TikTok.
All right. And those pride flags in the classroom, which apparently is a form of grooming.
And the gay penguins.
Yeah, exactly. This is the sexualization of our kids. And these parents who are convinced that teachers are trying to make their kids gay or trans, and putting their kids in private schools so they're not exposed to this because they think there's this agenda, the gay agenda. Quite honestly, no one wants the kids of staunchly and vocally anti-LGBTQ people to be in a situation where they might be belittled, rejected, or abused. I would rather have those people have straight kids so they don't have to go through the awful experience of being gay or trans in an unsupportive family.
Right? Like intellectually, you're like, haha, it would be hilarious for these people to have a queer kid. But yeah, on an emotional level, on a rational level, you're like, no, that would be awful.
Yeah. Nobody is trying to make the kids of unsupportive people gay because it would be horrible for them.
I have a theory about why certain demographics are so threatened by the idea that maybe a lot of people are just queer and maybe we have reached a point in society where it's okay to live your life like that and it's not a problem and people feel liberty. I think it's because they feel really threatened by queer people, because not just because they see it as a threat to like their lifestyle, that can't see air quotes on that side, their lifestyle, but also because I think there's a feeling of like deep unhappiness, actually. I think probably a lot of people who live in maybe really fundamentalist Christian communities, or these really restrictive gender roles, these restrictive relationship roles, are probably very deeply unhappy. And so when they see kids growing up realizing like, oh, I don't have to do that, I can do whatever I want, that's a feeling of like, well, I've suffered so much and I just suck it up and deal with it because this is the right way of living and this is how I was told I had to live. And I was going to face backlash if I pushed against that. So why should these kids get to do whatever they want?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another interesting thing about the idea that adults are leading kids to this is how often I think it's the opposite, not leading people to be a certain way, but exposing them to these ideas. I know many parents who have chosen to educate themselves on the actual science behind things like gender identity because they wanted to be supportive parents. This is not parents forcing an identity on their kids. Like in that case, that is parents learning something new because of their kids, because they want to support their kids. It's the other way around. This psychology professor and director of the Sexual and Gender Diversity Laboratory at University of California, Santa Cruz, Philip Hammock, said, the rigid lines around gender and sexuality are just opening up for everybody. Young people are just doing it. They're leading this revolution and they're forcing scientists to take a closer look.
Yeah. And also, like, a lot of parents are forcing certain gender roles and sexual roles on very small children. It's just that it's not gay. It's like jumpers and onesies for little boys that say ladies man and like people filming viral videos of taking their 10-year-old son to Hooters.
Speaking of sexualization of young people.
Right. It's, and like, oh, he's just teasing you because he has a crush on you. Like all of these things. Yeah, actually trying to force certain gender and sexual roles on children is a thing that happens. It's called straight people.
There's just a lot that falls flat in these narratives. All this stuff about kids are young and innocent and they don't need to be exposed to sexual ideas. Gender identity has nothing to do with sexual ideas. Gender identity is different. It's different. And the fact that the very idea of talking about gender is exposing them to sexual ideas, I don't know, maybe it just points to like, we've needed better sex ed for a very long time. It's not exposing them to sexualized things to talk about gender. Furthermore, I guarantee most kids are seeing far, far worse things on the internet from their friends, wherever, than the books that are in the school library.
Yeah. Also, if you're okay with a prince and a princess kissing in a Disney movie, but not two princes or two princesses.
Right. Again, a lot of these things just fall flat. The whole grooming narrative. I mean, I've been called a groomer because I'm a supportive ally. And it's just such a strange fixation to me, especially when you have all these people pointing at things like drag queens reading books to kids as somehow grooming them when there is no statistically significant evidence that that happens. But meanwhile, the places that these parents are completely happy and comfortable sending their kids to, like sports and church camps, that grooming is happening as we speak. That is a statistically significant thing that happens in these settings. Not everybody working in these settings is some kind of pedophile. I'm not saying that. Just there are a lot of cases. And you're fine with that. But there's not a consistent pattern of this happening in drag queen story hours. I've never heard of it happening. But that's what they're scared of. Do you remember your brother and I had that conversation where he said, we're all basically living in the Truman Show?
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh, that's kind of true. Like there are people like pulling the strings and telling us what to want and what to buy and how to live and where to go on vacation. And, all these things that we think are our decisions are like being fed to us.
Free will doesn't exist.
So that's what, like, it's not like transgender people and gay people are suddenly causing issues that they weren't causing before, or that there are issues because there are more of them. It's that somebody up there decided that this is a really solid culture war talking point and throws it at people constantly. And so it turns into an amplified culture war talking point. And to be fair, it happens on both sides. We see it happen in our local community where people that like I agree with on most things politically will point the finger at one thing being the cause of expensive housing that, then an entire group of people latches onto. And whether it's accurate or not, it's a really good way to get people upset. And what it feels to me, this is totally a tangent now, is it's all one group of wealthy people telling working class people that all of their problems are caused by the wealthy people on the other side of the political spectrum, back and forth.
Yeah, which is interesting because it really ties into a lot of, tropes of and then who are the wealthy people? Oh, they're the Jews, they're the wealthy overseas Asians, they're the rich gays. Like it's people don't like nuance.
People don't like nuance, and people, as much as they want equality in a fair society, people are not comfortable when everybody can have what they have, if they have things. And anyway, so like I said, tangent. But point being, so much of this is manipulated. And all these people are being led to believe that something is a problem that's not a problem, that's only in the news because somebody put it there because they're talking about it. It's fascinating to watch.
Okay, so there's one other thing, though, that, we look at the baby boomer and silent generation stats. And I think there's, obviously the point about it just being more safe to come out now and not having a lifetime of stigma, hammered into you is a very good point and, very valid and accurate. But I think there's another element that people are less inclined to talk about that comes up less frequently, which is that especially for queer men and transgender women, like an entire generation was basically wiped out by the AIDS epidemic, which people don't like to talk about because it's inconvenient, because it was such a deep, spectacular failure socially, medically, governmentally. I don't have statistics off the top of my head, and I should have come up with some, and maybe we can post some later, but like a really, really, really substantial portion of that demographic died in a period of like 10, 15 years. There are photos out there of like I think San Francisco gay men's choir of like, people in black turned around representing the members who died, and then the people in white who are still alive. And it's like 4 to 8 out of 100 or something. Like it's huge. It's awful. And, I just read this book called You Should Be So Lucky. It is not out yet. I think it comes out, or maybe it came out this week. Everyone should go read it. It's pretty good. I enjoyed it. But there was one line because it's set in the 60s. And there was one line towards the end where one of the characters was thinking about like, oh, maybe things will improve in the next, decade or so. Maybe things will get better. Maybe it'll be safer to be a queer man. And it just bummed me out so much because then I was thinking, oh my God, this is like a 22-year-old guy. And so he'll be in his 40s, early 50s by the time things like sort of get under control. And like probably like everyone he knows is going to die. It's terrible. Anyway, it was a bummer, but yeah, I think that's something that we don't talk about very frequently. But yeah, that's why there are no gay boomers.
Well, that's a really good point. And you're right. I think that is something that doesn't come up a lot. Important to recognize. You are not a person that is into fads. You find it annoying when people just jump on the bandwagon of things. Being honest, do you see people around you deciding to be gay or trans because other people are doing it?
So a couple of layers to this, I guess. First of all, I think it's really important to sort of parse through who do we assume is the one who is doing this because it's, supposedly trendy? Is it a non-binary person, assigned female person who still likes to wear dresses? Are we assuming that wearing dresses automatically means you must not be non-binary? Or is it, someone who says that they're bisexual but has only dated people of a different gender? Is it someone who, because this can actually happen within the queer community too, is it someone who says they're bisexual but has only dated people of the same gender? Like, there are, like, as soon as you start unpacking why we target specific individuals for this, it turns out it's really problematic and crappy. And you're like making a lot of assumptions about people you don't even know and you've never had a conversation with. As a rule, even when there are people who I'm like, I did not catch that vibe off of you, or you kind of annoy me and you don't feel very authentic to me, I try to keep in mind that, like, I don't know what's going on in someone's life or their head or like what they feel. And probably the assumptions that I make about people are rooted in biases that it's my responsibility to unpack, not to project onto other people and assume that I know them better than they know themselves. So that's one thing. Second, you mentioned this earlier, but it's important to draw a distinction between, oh my God, everyone loves Justin Bieber, I'm going to get Justin Bieber's name tattooed on my arm. That's a fad. Versus, okay, what was it? What was Will saying about Taylor Swift?
Was it like he didn't think he should like Taylor Swift?
Yeah, it was like he didn't think boys were supposed to like Taylor Swift, but he did like Taylor Swift. So there's a difference between, a fad and seeing, oh, here's a thing that people really like. And, oh, boys can like Taylor Swift. I'm going to listen to Taylor Swift. And maybe in 5 years, you're like, hey, not my thing. But there's a difference between doing it to sort of make a point or like to be in the social club versus realizing that you have the freedom to do it and exploring it because of that.
And that maybe if like another guy in your class talks about being a Taylor Swift fan, you're like, oh, I can actually be open about liking Taylor Swift.
Right.
Because I'm not the only guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you think of any adult that has tried to talk you into being gay?
I don't think I can think of any adults in my life even referencing queerness until I came out. I think none of my teachers had rainbow flags. All my teachers were married to people of a different gender. I can think of I actually feel like I was quite sheltered. I think I'd be quite sheltered from all mentions of queerness, actually. And yet,
here you are. And what would be the benefits of jumping on the bandwagon and pretending to be gay?
I don't know.
What is it these kids are being enticed with?
I mean, okay, so I guess there is a tendency, I think, not even amongst like kids in general, but amongst a specific demographic of like very left-leaning younger people, I think, to create a sort of like oppression competition, which is irritating and like erases the way that privilege actually works, which is very complicated and multifaceted. And so, if you start just, checking off boxes like, oh, I'm low income and I'm not white and I'm also gay, then I guess in very specific circles that will earn you more points, I guess. But I don't think that's actually, I think those are really, really narrow circles. And I don't think that the vast majority of people have any interest in being part of them.
Well, and especially not the parents that are most worried about their kids being pressured into
Right.
gay are not probably in those circles.
No.
Unless it's like a specific act of rebellion. I figure if you are vocally anti-LGBTQ at home with your kids, they will say they're gay or trans for one of two reasons. One is to rebel against you. And the other is they really and truly are.
It can also be both.
Or both. But there's not a lot of like, oh, that looks fun, I think.
Yeah.
It's more, if you are one of those kids from one of those families, I'm guessing there's more like just sheer terror than like, ooh, I want to do that.
They get rainbows. I want rainbows. There you go. That's the reason. It's because the gays have claimed the rainbows, and so nobody else can have a rainbow.
People say that. They're like luring them in with pretty bright colors. I have seen that. I've actually seen that. That's a thing. Not that is not a thing, but people think that's a thing. It is a thing that people think, which is hard to take seriously. But I guess they think like, oh, so my kid sees these other kids that like are like, oh, this represents me. And they're like, I mean, as a kid, I would have been like, I want the rainbow to represent me too.
The rainbow can also represent you.
Yes, exactly. Nobody's like hoarding the rainbow flags. Like I put rainbow stickers on things and rainbow flags up because I support people.
Right. You like rainbows and
like
you're an ally.
Exactly. You don't have to be gay to have a rainbow. Also, if I were one of those kids and my parents were always talking about how horrible gay people were, even if I thought, oh, I want to be one of the kids that has a rainbow, if somebody said, okay, then you have to be gay, I would have been like, okay, fine, I'll get a rainbow. Aw, like sad. Poor little Sarah doesn't get a rainbow, but I certainly wouldn't have like pretended to be gay to get the rainbow. So we are putting the myth stamp on this. It's not a fad.
Just one more thing, I guess. Also, it's worth observing that a lot of people who would have considered themselves straight or been assumed to be straight historically probably were also engaging in like same-sex behavior. You know, there's like it's like the whole stereotype about like girls kissing as girlfriends or whatever, or like guys watching porn together, like in Love Actually.
Or when we were watching Shrinking the other night, and she was like, everybody's gay in college.
Yeah, right. And so like that's not a new thing. And it's entirely possible that maybe some people who would have engaged in that behavior anyway, but people would have assumed they were straight, or they would have been like, well, I don't know, like it's gay or straight, so I guess I'm straight. Maybe now they're like, oh, you know, maybe I'm bi. Who cares? And they might still mostly prefer to date people or a different gender, and like that's fine. So, you know, there might also just be some like more awareness of, oh, maybe there are words that describe this, and I'm not going to just identify as straight, even if, again, from an outside perspective, you're like, this is a straight dude. We have language. It's nice. It's nice to have words to describe your experience.
And maybe that's threatening to some people if they're like, oh, I have that celebrity girl crush or whatever. Like, does that mean I'm bi?
Oh my God.
Everybody's saying bi. And
one time I kissed a guy as practice.
Yeah. Like maybe it's like making people, maybe that there's a name for everything is making people think that things that they thought weren't anything, maybe they are something.
Mm-hmm.
Fear motivates.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to the dark side. So stop.
Love more, hate less. Yeah.
So next time we are going to be talking about the idea of pinkwashing when it comes to trying to make countries or entities who maybe don't have a great LGBTQ plus track record, trying to seem more queer friendly than they actually are, and specifically how that occurs in the context of Muslim majority countries and Middle Eastern countries, and even more specifically in the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Until then, take care. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
If you found this podcast helpful, interesting, or just mildly amusing, please consider rating and reviewing us on your podcasting platform of choice. It really helps us to get the word out there and spread this information as far as we can.
And as always, check out our website at queerkidsstraightmom.com or visit us on Facebook, Queer Kid Straight Mom, Instagram at queerkid.straightmom, or Twitter at queerkidstr8 mom.
And if you're feeling especially generous, please consider joining our Patreon by searching Queer Kids Straight Mom. It helps us fund this podcast.